Welcome to Engaging and Empowering School Libraries, a podcast that aims to raise the profile of school libraries by talking about topics that are current across education and teaching. I've been trying to keep up with all things AI over the last couple of years and very quickly realised that it was actually impossible. Each week, there are several new tools released, all offering a quick fix to a problem I may or may not have. As a school library specialist, I've often thought that AI is something that will bring school libraries back into focus. The changing picture of education and how teaching to the test is being challenged excites me. It opens the door into education for those of us who have the skills that now everyone is talking about. So today, Ruth and I are joined by Jason Gulya, an AI consultant for colleges and a professor of English and applied media, who I have been following on LinkedIn for a couple of years now. He seems to love AI and also resist it in equal measures, which I find really interesting. He does have one other thing in his bag that makes him an ideal guest on this podcast. His wife is a librarian. So, Jason, you need no other credentials to join us tonight. Welcome. Would you like to do a little bit of an introduction to yourself and explain a little bit about how you became interested in AI for us?
Yeah, sure. And I love that you brought my wife into the conversation immediately. She's a librarian at a very small public library. And so, I mean, her focus, on information literacy, all that sort of stuff, like it very much kind of is reflected in the way that I approach it. I love talking about this stuff and information and research and all that sort of stuff. So, very quick background about me for anyone who doesn't know what I do and everything. So, yeah, I teach writing, I teach research, and increasingly I teach anything related to the humanities. So I'm at Berkeley College, so I'm not on the California side. I'm on the New Jersey, New York side. So very small and very career driven. And that has actually helped me over the last couple of years because unlike with a lot of colleges and universities, when I really decided to try to figure out what this AI thing was, especially when ChatGPT came out and everyone's kind of interested in it, and I was really just trying to like wrap my head around it. When I did that, I got very little pushback. Part of it was that I was able to say, well, this thing is being used in the job force, and so they kind of let me experiment with it, which I know that in a lot of contexts, people didn't have that. And when I first started to play with ChatGPT, which I had been actually thinking about AI generated writing for a while before that, but this was the first time that I felt like I had a tool that I could really play with and I could play with for free. But when I first started to do it, I came at it from a position of sheer horror. Like I was horrified, I was upset, I was depressed by this technology. I looked at it, I really used it for like 10 minutes and I was just absolutely flabbergasted by what I could see as the really, really bad uses of this technology. And I kind of went to where a lot of educators go. I went immediately to plagiarism, right? This is a plagiarism machine, right? That's what it fundamentally was when I started to play with it. And I put it aside and I went back to it. I literally put it aside for a couple of weeks, went back to it, and I started to play with it really as a learner. And I tried to think about what that mindset would allow me to do. So basically, what could I teach myself using this technology? And I tried to be, a little bit more, not necessarily objective, but kind of more holistic with thinking about it, not have that kind of knee-jerk reaction. And that's kind of where I got started. And so that dynamic has not gone away. I don't talk about this that much. That many times I think that it's sort of framed as like, oh, and then I saw the light and I realized that and that is fundamentally not true. I have a lot of negative ideas and positive ideas, negative ideas, and all across the spectrum. And one of the things that I try to do with social media is I try to be really honest about it. And I try to call out when I see technology moving in the wrong direction. And, especially because, and there is this distinction we made between what's going on with technology and what's going on with the people who are developing it.
Yeah.
I've tried to be very, very honest with my criticism of Stan Altman and Suleiman and everyone else. Because I'm increasingly convinced that these are not the people we want in charge of the technology. And I try to be very, very clear with, where my criticism lies, and the good and the bad, because I think that there are so many hypists out there it's all about just, here's this technology, it's going to change the world, so adapt and die, that sort of narrative, which I'm so opposed to. And then
Yeah.
others who are on the other side of the spectrum, right, and just say we should just get rid of it, right, with just whatever we can do, just get rid of it, whatever that would even look like, or ban it, or all this sort of like weird language that gets into libraries, get into classrooms, right?
Yeah.
And to speak from the librarian perspective, if I talk to my wife about banning anything, right, huge red flag, right, she would like start waving it around the room, like very literally, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, she's at the forefront of, you don't ban things, right? Like, whether
Yeah.
no matter how you feel about it, you do not do it. And so for her, it's like very jarring, and it is for me too, to hear that language even used when we're talking about something like education, certainly higher education. So yeah, that's kind of how I approach it, having the good and the bad, and trying to be very honest with just what I see and really what the implications are of this technology.
Absolutely. It's funny because my journey with it is fairly similar. Sort of when it sort of hit in November 22, it was like, what is this? And can I ignore it? Can I just not pretend it's not happening? And then I think I managed to get to Christmas and then thought, actually, no, there's something here that I really need to look at. And it's been interesting because I don't think librarians on the whole have been part of the conversation. And if you talk to, I've talked to a lot of school librarians that are terrified of it as much as they are excited about it. We have this sort of, if anybody decides to put on a webinar about AI and libraries, it's like everybody's there. And actually, how is the conversation changing over the last couple of years? So it's really refreshing, actually, Jason, to hear you talk about things like using paper and pen. I think your last post on LinkedIn, well, mind you post lots, so you might probably posted something recently since then, but it was you were talking a lot about not using AI as much as you talk about using it. And what I hear is it's really thoughtful, Jason, the way you talk, and it's because it's not that you're definitely not anti-AI, but you seem to be able to make that balance between, we have this wonderful tool, but actually, the old ways that are equally as important. Is this part of your journey, I suppose, is the question?
It's the only way I can make sense of things. One of the really jarring aspects of the conversation around AI, for me, especially the last couple of years, is this assumption. I think it's rarely stated, but this assumption that AI is going to be a silver bullet, right? It's going to allow us to have fully personalized learning, right? This is Suleiman's narrative, which is fundamentally not true, right? Fully personalized learning where everyone is supported all the time in whatever they want to do. And this is going to make us all superstars, right? Played with the language a little bit, but that's essentially what he thinks. And so one of the things that I try to do is I try to keep learning at the center, right? If you brought that with a focus on teaching and pedagogy, no, it's going to fall completely flat on its face, because so many of us understand, whether you're a librarian or, teaching in the classroom or whatever it is, that there's an ecosystem of learning, right? It's not just one thing, right? It's so tempting to say, and this happens all the time, lecture doesn't work, right? Or this doesn't work, but an AI tutor will work and solve all these things. That's not how learning works, right? Learning is really very much a tapestry that some students, yes, will be served by an AI tutor. A lot of them will not, right? Some students will be served by doing things with pen and paper. Others won't. So what you do is you layer it, right? And we're so used to doing this, we don't even think about this, that if you just have one strategy that you're going to use to reach all students, you are set up to fail.
Absolutely.
If you use different strategies layered on top of each other, some of which will reach some students, some will reach the other students, then you start to get there. And we've known this for a long time, right? This is universal design learning. This is not like a brand new thing, but many of the individuals who are creating this technology and selling it to schools fundamentally lose touch with that. And that's where you get all these narratives of replacing teachers, right? We don't need them anymore because we have this program. Or we don't need, my wife hears this too, we don't need librarians anymore. We have blank program. We have Perplexity to do all our research for us. And it's just like, from that perspective that that's not true. It is a marketing stance. It is a selling point. And I think for me, thinking about that ecosystem of learning and really that ecosystem of information, right? To think about, especially that library side, like that's where I think we need to be. Right? I think that's what we need to be thinking about, because otherwise it's a lot of this kind of ideology of silver bullets where you talk about replacement and everything else. And I can't see myself being happy with that, because students people are so different. I don't know why we go into this space and suddenly we think, oh, awesome, we're just going to iron everything out with the technology, which anyone who's been tracking ed tech for the last 30 years knows not how it works.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the fact that even, we've seemed to lose sight of the fact that in order to use an AI tool, you have to be able to read. The fact that, you have to be able to think, you have to have some background knowledge. All of this seems to be just forgotten because there's wonderful AI tool. It's almost that step on from Google, isn't it? Where students like to type the question in and they get, at least we thought that was bad when they used to get a list of websites. Now it just has, it's written for them, but they don't know whether what is being written is right or not because it sounds so plausible. It's just, so there's a real teaching opportunity, isn't there, to go back to basics, to put those building blocks in place and to actually provide something that is of value that then allows them to use AI if it's the tool that they want to use. It's a fascinating journey that they're all going on, I think. Can I bring you in, Ruth?
Yeah, indeed. So there's a lot in there that's really interesting. There was the conference that I was at in place of Elizabeth last week, there were some really interesting comments, and one of them was about the language which is used when we talk about AIs, a language like chat and intelligence, giving this idea that there is something cognitive in there, and how dangerous that is. And it made me think, have we learned nothing from the teaching in COVID that what is important is the human interaction? And the minute you have that removed, which you always do with AI, however well it simulates a human, it isn't thinking, it isn't empathetic, it isn't actually understanding where your cognitive gaps are, you are failing your learners in some massive way. But I think what was interesting was that it was a group of people. I go to a lot of AI training, or I have been to a lot of AI seminars. I quite often come away thinking I haven't got any further in my thinking. And I go expecting that everybody will be of the same kind of level of understanding. In fact, there were people in that seminar who clearly had not really understood much about AI at all. And then there were people there who were thinking at a really deep level, both ethically, pedagogically, and there were people who were selling AI tools. So it's a really interesting thing. And I'm just wondering, do you think it's necessary to kind of level that up? Or do you think that some of us carry on and work out what we need to let the others know to bring them along with us? Is it necessary to train everybody up to a level where they actually understand that AI isn't thinking, and which is quite a low bar, really?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And is it necessary, and is it possible? Or one of the things that I come back to is just really, thinking about that practical aspect to it. That I guess when I think about the technology, I do think that there's always going to be that unevenness. I just don't see any indication that's going to go away. And you encounter this so much in the classroom too. Really, any sort of group of people, you go into a group, you're going to have. I have students who have never heard of ChatGPT. Legitimately, they have no reason to lie to me, have no idea what I'm talking about. And then I have some students who are building a business around it. And you'll have students all across the spectrum, which is very much representative of where people are. Right? People who are now saying, oh, I can build my own business around it. And others saying, a decent chunk, never using it, never really, even going past using it for, say, half an hour or so, or an hour, never really getting the sense of the problematics. And I think that's a lot of what is at issue here, right? That how important are conversations about, say, intelligence and when we're projecting onto a machine? And it's so interesting today because this morning I taught literature and I taught short stories for the first time. And we started off looking at Rorschach tests, right? Ink blot tests. And I showed them a couple and I asked them what they saw. And we talked about the human mind. And we talked about when we look at something like that, we're actually really bad as humans of just letting something be meaningless, right? There's something that we project meaning onto it. And from there, I actually went and I talked about Hemingway. His whole thing is that he's going to give you a little detail. He's going to give you a little bit, and you're just going to do the rest of the work, right? There's so many stories that do that. And in many ways, we're going to see that, I think, happening with AI, that we're getting this machine and we're getting these outputs that look really reasonable, like they could have been written by a human. So we very quickly project humanity onto it. And I think you're right that gap needs to really be shown as problematic. I don't think we're ever going to get to the point where everyone recognizes it. And I don't think we need to, because I do think that, my practical side does want to say that we can compartmentalize a little bit. Because I think that conversation about intelligence, empathy, emotion, right? Whether these machines actually have these things or if we're projecting onto it, I'm in the projecting camp, right? That's what I think we're fundamentally doing. That we can put that in a compartment. And then I think there's another conversation which is sort of linked to it, but can happen even if you don't get to the same level, which is that even if AI doesn't become quote unquote intelligence, right? Say it doesn't have true intelligence and it never, ever, ever will. But it can still do X, Y, and Z. What does that mean, right? So what that does, it kind of like shelves that conversation about intelligence and it says, okay, but if it can do certain tasks, what does that mean going forward? So I think that's one way of dealing with it, if that makes sense, that it kind of creates these two compartments. And yeah, they're not totally separate. I don't think they ever will be. But I think that if we wait for everyone to, or even a good portion of people to come to a consensus about something as ill-defined as intelligence or emotion, I think it's going to take us a while. And maybe we'll never do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and there were, there was some very interesting conversations going on about how it's going and where it is. And, and then I was listening to an article on the radio talking about the change, which I think, if I'm perfectly honest, and I shouldn't admit this, I had not noticed until it was highlighted on the radio that Google searches are now AI-ing the results for you, if that's even a verb. And are pulling through the results. And that was the point at which I thought, this for me is the essence of the AI conversation that I want to have with people, regardless of whether they are using ChatGPT. That's almost old hat now, because those people who are using ChatGPT are interested and are engaged and have already formed their opinions. But people are falling into AI without noticing it. And that's really important, because that bias that it's pushing through your Google search, it felt to me like the essence of the conversation I wanted to be having with people who didn't know what they were getting into.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I think that's a huge conversation, and it hasn't gotten nearly enough conversation yet. I think we need to, it's important, but I think we need to think a little bit less about people going to AI, right? The individuals who say bring up ChatGPT on their phone, on their browser, anything like that. And we need to think a little bit more about what happens when AI comes to them.
Yeah.
Right? We know that it's going to just one day people are going to go on their new iPhones and it's just going to be there. It's going to be embedded. We know that it's being worked into all these different programs. This is something I try to talk about to faculty with, because that's what we need to think about. Because, and this doesn't even require prediction. Like, we know it's coming, right? There's every reason why it's going to be there, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, or it's going to stick, whatever. But it's already in Google search. It's going to be, you know, in so many different parts of Microsoft. They already have they already have AI computers that have an AI button in the lower left part of the computer or the laptop, and students are just going to hit it. And it's a matter of like, well, what do we do when that happens, right? When it becomes such a big part of these programs and the hardware, right? And I think that's the conversation that needs to happen, thinking about hardware when it's like fundamentally there. Like, what do you do with that? What happens when generative AI in one form or another becomes an interface that our students are using to get information? And it's kind of funny in the academic conversations, because for years I've been talking about you know, what happens when someone uses AI and doesn't know it. And for a long time, you sort of get laughed off, right? You still sort of are. I am that. Oh, if someone goes into ChatGPT, they know they're using AI. Well, but yes, but now you have programs. Grammarly, it's a little hidden, right? There are other ones. It's kind of, it's a little. It's not so. Yes, if you had a button and it spits out an entire essay, yeah, we know, right? And they know. Sometimes they don't, though, and it's reasonable not to know. Right? I think that changes the conversation.
Yeah, no,
so
I agree.
Go on, sorry, Ruth.
No, go. Sorry.
I was just going to say, so leading that on then, if we are in this place where there's, well, I suppose the thing is, for me, is that when I began to look at AI a bit more, I suddenly realized that actually we're already using it. So you've just mentioned Grammarly, for example. I was using Grammarly and still are. Thank God for Grammarly. But it was almost unnoticed. I had not thought to myself when I started using it that was an AI tool. It just hadn't even crossed my mind. It was just another tool. And we are going to get more bombarded with it, it just being in everyday life without us noticing it. So it's a big question to ask, Jason, but how do you think it will impact our students going forward? And is there anything that we can be thinking about to help them navigate it, or do you think that we're doing as much as we can?
I definitely think there's more we can do. I am in the practical camp. I very much think that we need very specific strategies for our students, because some of them are in the thick of this. A lot of them are not. A lot of them are kind of just at the cusp of the very beginning of what's happening. And as with any group of individuals, they're so different, right? There's such a huge range in terms of what they know and what they can do. And one of the things that, you know, I'm really, really trying to bang the drum for is foundational skills. Right? I think that we get wrapped up in all this language about AI literacy as its own individual thing, and that's fine. But what we really need is information literacy, digital literacy, like these things that we should have been teaching for a long time. Absolutely. And one of the things that I try to emphasize with AI is that I think because we have the language of disruption and this idea that it's going to change everything. It's going to change everything about the world and everything about information, and nothing will ever be the same. And your grandkids are going to be fundamentally different people than you are, which 99% of the time is a sales pitch. I think personally that what we really need to do is focus on things that work and that have worked for a while. These strategies, they can come back to information literacy, they can come back to pedagogy and the classroom. But for me, the big positive side of something like AI is that it pushes us to do that. That when I started training with AI, you know, training faculty members how to use it, and this was probably a few months after ChatGPT came out, I was astounded by what people were still doing. really, practices that I thought had died a long time ago, right? Faculty members going and marking up a student's paper with red ink and saying, you have X number of grammatical errors, you get a 90 or you get an 80, or that was still happening, right? Writing classes that were entirely about grammar. And so what I'm hoping, if we keep pushing and really thinking about it, is that this technology is a chance to really rethink those, which doesn't mean, doing everything out of nowhere, but saying, are we really doing everything that we can be doing? Because I think so much about going forward is going to be about foundational skills. It's going to be about reading and writing. It's going to be about critical thinking. All these things that if we don't steer very, very carefully, AI is going to put pressure on, maybe even eventually jeopardize. That one of the things that's so concerning about generative AI is it looks really good. It looks really good, right? If you're a student, it looks really, really good. And so many of us, myself included, are victims to the curse of knowledge. And I think this is one of the big problems right now, that I will just say to students that a lot of people do, like, oh, make sure you check the output, right? To me, that makes sense, right? Because of my knowledge, because of the things that I go through, because of what I do with AI, that makes sense. You say that to a high school student or a middle school student, even sometimes a college student, what? No idea. No idea, right? And then Ruth, you also mentioned Google search. I was recently talking to my students. My students had zero idea, and they had been using it, that it was generative AI giving them answers, that they had to check it. Sometimes it was right, sometimes it was wrong. And I think the big question is going to be, how can we encourage critical thinking and skepticism with whenever we get technology, which again, we should have been doing for a while, but not go overboard with it? I think that's going to be the balance, right? Because yes, we want to be skeptical with all the information we get, but it's also hard for me to envision a world in which we're skeptical 100% of the time, right? It's just like the mind, I don't think we can be that aware. And what I'm hoping is that if we push enough, from libraries and librarians and educators, that we can find a way to make that work. And then eventually I hope that it's going to, whether it's regulation or whatever, but there's going to be some accountability, because right now there's not much. But I do think we can definitely push forward with certain technologies, with certain strategies. But right now, I think a lot of it is foundational skills. What does it mean to research? What does it mean to believe something? Why believe something? And from there, I think the big thing is going to be collaboration. That's why I think we need as many people at the table as we can, right? I think librarians have to be there, educators, students have to be there, right? As many people as you possibly can. But you look at every big conference and who's speaking? EdTech CEOs, right? There's a major education conference going out today. Who's speaking? Sal Khan. Why? Why is he your keynote? Like, no, right? Individuals that we really need to broaden that conversation. We need to broaden who is being listened to. Because if we don't do that, I think finding out future strategies, it's going to be hard. I think it's going to be really, really difficult unless we significantly broaden who is at the table.
So that's a really interesting concept, that other people might be at this table. And how on earth so we talk about there needs to be some kind of framework, some kind of strategy. I don't know how much you may or may not know about FOSSIL, Jason, but FOSSIL is a framework for inquiry-based learning. Basically from reception, so the day that a child arrives in school right the way through till they're 18, there are strategic skill set that is set out and planned. And the more I look at it, the more I realize that actually that's the skill set that is needed. That is, but it sounds like it's librarians going, oh, this is fantastic, this is what you need. But actually, having worked alongside teachers, who suddenly get it, that realize that actually the strategies and the way that school librarians teach research skills is less about the high tech, wow, this is amazing AI. It's more about actually, I've had to think about this and focusing on the student. And I think we forget that students are involved in this conversation. You know, you said bring them to the table. And I think, you know, when you say to a student, you know, there's a piece of information, how do you feel about it? They struggle. They really struggle. Why am I supposed to feel anything? There's the information. And it's like we need to bring those kind of conversations. You know, our students and our children sit behind computers. They don't talk to each other. Those communication skills need to be enhanced. Do you know, but it seems to be that in the conferences, it's all tech. So if somebody like me or Ruth stood up and started talking about, you know, back to basics, people would be not expecting that, and I think you'd have a lot of pushback. So how do you bring together the people that are interesting to talk to, that are going to help push this conversation along, that are talking the way we are talking, and I'm just and the right people hearing it, I think that's the other thing. It's a big ask, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And a lot of it comes down to, figuring out who those people are. And I'll be totally honest, and maybe this is not the most positive thing to share. When I listen to someone speaking at a conference, right? So they're giving a presentation, whether they're keynoting, whatever. If they mention their program in the first 30 seconds, I am out. I am super out. I am walking out the door. I am no longer listening to that talk. I have limited bandwidth. I do not have time for that. I think that so I personally gravitate towards people who are bothered in some way or another. I think that's where a lot of us are, right? Thinking about like these big, big questions. So and this happens all the time. So someone reached out to me, they're creating some ed tech product and it has AI embedded in it. I will often ask them a social question, right? Like, okay, cool. You invented that thing. Let's imagine that every student in the country bought it, right? Or got it, or they got access to it. What would the implications be? Right? What would the big things? And if they don't have an answer, if they haven't really, really, really thought about that, I know we're on different wavelengths, right? And maybe there's a way to continue that conversation. Maybe there's not. We're in different spaces, and sometimes we have those things we hit up against, and it's just not worth it having that conversation. But that's what we need to be doing, right? We need to be thinking about anything that we work into a school, anything we work into a library, right? These public spaces that have a lot of times vulnerable individuals, right, in various ways. We need to think very, very seriously about if that is worth it. And I don't subscribe to the AI is going to be everywhere, so adapt and die. I do not believe in that narrative. I think we have more agency than we tend to think. And one of the reasons that we lose touch with that is because the powers that be are marketing against that narrative. They don't want that narrative, right? They actually want the AI is here, and so everyone just learn to deal with it. They want that because that gives them more power, and it takes power away from us and from libraries and from citizens and from educators. So I think that, and I don't want to exclude any voices, and I do think that ed tech CEOs, like, they have a lot to say, they have a lot to contribute to the conversation, but I think the conversation has really been pushed in their direction. And the vast majority of the time when you listen to those panels, they tend to have a certain feel to them, right? They tend to be how-tos, they tend to be tutorials, they tend to be that sort of thing, and that's fine. But I also think we have to push. We have to push to thinking about the larger social implications, because we're going to be held accountable, right? 10 years from now, we're going to be held accountable for what we do today. And we're going to be held accountable for how this technology is being worked into libraries and schools and across the board. And my personal thing is that I want to do things that I feel proud of, right? That I actually think, oh, okay, I pushed through that, or I pushed against that. And that's the other thing. I think we have to do a better job creating spaces of resistance. And this is something that I try to really look at, that, if we're in the business of educating and giving people a chance to access information that they can rely upon, then we need to be more open to different approaches to this technology. And I would love to see AI conferences where someone comes in and says, I resist AI and here's why. That's never in the conversation. A lot of my students fit in that category. Right? I have to create assignments that allow them to use it or not use it, because I'm not going to require it. I'm just ethically opposed to it. And especially for my students, I don't think that would make sense anyway. For some institutions, fine, maybe it works out okay. But for my students in my institution, I do not feel that way. And my personal belief is that if someone wants to resist this technology and not use generative AI and be very vocal about it, I'm there for it. I am there for that conversation, even if it is uncomfortable, right? Even if it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, that's the thing, isn't it? Is that if you are the voice that's saying, how is this, ethically a good tool to use? How is this, good for the planet? How is this good for whatever else comes to mind? If you are the person that says that, the social media world likes to jump in and pile on, and it's not a comfortable conversation to be had. And actually, we as adults, we as educators, we as librarians or teachers need to be able to sit in a social media space and have those conversations in a caring, thoughtful way, as opposed to the fight that seems to go on online these days, which is, it's sad that the loudest voices are making it seem like everybody's using AI. and really that's not the case, is it?
No, sorry, just so there are several things that I've been thinking. The thing that I'm also quite aware of is that there is a disparity in the use of AI that we're talking about for research and academic purposes, and the kind of AI that most of our students are encountering all the time, which is tweetering along in the back of their Snapchats or TikToks or whatever it is, which is their massive exposure to AI. And we think of, or certainly I think of as slightly different and slightly separate. But really, it's the same skill set, and it's what you were talking about fundamental skills and the things that Fossil deals with, that Elizabeth was referring to, and what I've been saying to Elizabeth for a long time, which is I feel like this is a librarian space. This is what we have been doing with students. And I think I almost want to stop talking about AI, and I almost want to say, these are just things that you need to learn. This is part of education. You need to learn to, when we say check your knowledge, we mean triangulate your resources. Go and read about that somewhere else. And I say to my students, if you bring me a book and that's the only book you have cited in your essay, I'm going to go and tell you to cross-check that somewhere else. If you bring me Wikipedia, I'm going to say, that was a great starting point. Now go look at the references and read them somewhere else. If you bring me anything, I'm going to tell you that. So stop talking about AI as if it's some magical solution. It's just another thing in the pot. And I agree with you. I want to stop going to spaces where I'm told about prompt engineering or one product is better than another. I don't want to have those conversations, because that's like telling me that one website is better than another. I want to have the conversations about how do we teach our students to recognize that that might be going on in the background, and to think about what the implication is for them of that. Grammarly is a prime example. In our school working party on AI, I've been flagging Grammarly as an issue for a long time, because I think there is a point at which Grammarly becomes academically dishonest. If it's rewriting your sentences for you and our students are being assessed for grammar, that's academically dishonest, you know, and we need to be, but they don't think of it like that. They just say, oh, well, it's just like the spell check on Word. Well, it is like the spell check on Word, and you can't use the spell check on Word in an exam. So, but those are conversations that I never go to a conference and people are working at that kind of practical, you know, fundamental level. That's my frustration, I think. And it's taken me a long time of going to these training sessions and thinking, yeah, I understand prompt engineering. That's like, yeah. But why is the conversation not going somewhere that I feel is moving on, I think?
Yeah, I have a strategy that I use that people, I don't know if they like it or not. So when I go to conferences and I'm having a conversation with someone about AI, and you know, we're having a conversation, and I get the sense that we're just kind of talking past each other. There are two red flags that go up for me that I immediately put pressure on. And Ruth, you actually mentioned kind of both of them. One, and they're kind of weirdly connected. One, anytime someone brings up an analogy, I poke at it. I can't help it. As soon as someone says AI is like a calculator or Grammarly is just like spell check, right? As soon as they do that, I really recommend, you know, especially if you feel comfortable with the other person, you think they're receptive to an honest conversation, just poke at it, right? Just get a sense of like, is it really though? Right. And I had a conversation where, you know, I was talking to someone, this is early, you know, early after ChatGPT came out, and everyone was equating it to the calculator. Right. And I said, all right, so we're going to do this. So, all right, well, no, let's put pressure on that. And so I did research. You know what's actually really, really controversial in math education? The calculator, right? There's all of this research about when you can introduce it, right? All this research says actually, if you introduce it before fifth grade or so about 10 years old, it's actually detrimental to the student's understanding of math, and they never get out of its shadow, right? And like things like that was like, oh, you created this analogy, but it actually might not mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean that, oh, just so AI everywhere. It means we have to be extremely purposeful with it, right? Because we're going to equate it with calculators, right? And so I try to do that. And I actually think that independent of where you are on the spectrum of AI, I think that conversation can become helpful. And the other thing, which feels like the opposite, anytime someone has what I kind of call AI exceptionalism, right? That AI is its own thing, right? It's its own kind of just totally unique thing, right? So kind of the anti-analogy side. So whenever someone does that, right, AI is something entirely new that's going to change everything about us, and it cannot be equated to anything ever, right? Poke at it, just like really, really poke at it. And that's where I think foundational skills come in. Like, why is it special, right? Why is it special? I don't think it is, like, in any form, right? I actually think that a lot of the skills that we should have been prizing for a long time, those are exactly what we should be doing, right? We should be applying. And one of the things that has happened, I think, especially, you know, in school, and maybe it's happened in libraries too, be a much better job of this than I am, but that skills like critical thinking and analysis have been put in a box, right? And I don't think anyone did this. I think this just happened. It was put in a box, and basically the suggestion was that you use these in school. These are school things, right? These are research things. And then, you know, there's a lot that happens when you do that. And a lot of what I think we can do is break that box apart, right? And say, oh, that TikTok video you watched, apply critical thinking, right? And that's, I think, this hard selling point, right? Apply it, right? And that allows you, I think, to model for our students how to actually exist in this world, right? Maybe it does come down to, oh, you watch something on TikTok and you triangulate sources and you cross-reference and you try to figure it out. Maybe but it feels like we're ruining something fun, but that's exactly what we need to be doing. We won't be cool for it, but I think it's necessary.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let me move us on just slightly, because I've noticed the time. So before I go to my final question, I'm going to cut the conversation short. I'm really sorry, but I'm just going to take a few minutes to introduce Engaging and Empowering School Libraries, a transformative training membership designed exclusively for innovative school librarians. If you're a school librarian passionate about fostering collaboration across all subjects, I extend a warm invitation to you to join me on this remarkable journey. My mission is simple yet powerful: to empower school librarians through comprehensive training and unwavering support. By equipping them with the necessary tools and knowledge, I aim to help you enhance independent learning, elevate literacy levels, and nurture overall student well-being through the incredible resource that is your school library. By joining my community, you'll embark on an exciting adventure alongside like-minded individuals who are equally committed to educational excellence. Together, we'll explore a unique learning experience that embraces innovation and encourages the growth of your students. And for more information about this extraordinary opportunity, please visit the link provided in the show notes below. Don't miss out on the chance to be part of this wonderful journey. And interestingly enough, in November, I am doing a AI session. So I am going to have to be extremely careful.
I shall make sure I'm there, Elizabeth, to keep you on track.
There'll be no ChatGPT. Or it won't be the only one anyway. So let's just round this up. We've talked a lot about AI being part of the future. We've talked a lot about the foundational skills that we need. How do you, looking at our final question, if you just had one suggestion for the school librarians listening to the conversation that we've had tonight, what would you suggest for them to get a seat at the AI table in their school?
So I'm going to start really abstract, and I'll try to get more specific from there. But, I think, and this kind of goes for any sector, I think the big thing is going to be really, really insisting on your value in that space. And I think that, like, for me, like you say, like, yes, the librarian has value in that space and has a lot to contribute. Like, that is just like painfully obvious, right? Like, yes, absolutely. And I think it's to make it more specific, I think that a lot of it comes down to, I wish it weren't like this, but finding that champion for you. Right. So one of the things that I do whenever I'm asked to be on something, on a new AI task force or whatever else, I always try to push for people to come along with me. Right. Librarians and students are the big ones I'm pushing for now, because I so very much believe that we need to broaden this conversation. So, and my guess is that a lot of institutions have that. And then really, I would say, other than that, I really think it just comes down to connecting. So the way that I've done this is through social media, right? Creating this kind of relationship, and then you find yourself being invited to things, right? I wish we didn't have to play the game, right? I really, really do. But just, having those connections, getting onto those panels, into those conferences. And then I think it kind of snowballs from there, and really just being very, very open with it. Because I think that on the one hand, making an argument that librarians, should be a major part of the conversation makes you kind of stand out and seem sort of, a kind of a marginal voice. But that can also be extremely powerful. One of the things that I went through probably about 6 months to a year ago, I tried to figure out, what I had further to add to the conversation around AI and education. And I kind of looked at what we were doing, sort of interested in, X, Y, and Z. And I had this like very weird moment when I just said, it's to offer a nuanced perspective. That was like it, right? That's like, it's so kind of depressing on one end that becomes a way to kind of stand out from other social media, right? I'm just going to be nuanced and take the good and the bad and like put them together. And it like works to stand out and, really emphasize and banging the drum for librarians and information literacy, I think is so key, right? Posting on social media is another way to do it. And then also make clear that, AI literacy, whatever that is, like librarians are in such a great position to start figuring that out and being very specific with the language, right? And concrete with the language, which we're doing such a bad job being specific and concrete with. So that I would say, would be my general, my basic strategies now, like, finding those connections that get you in to those tables and then just kind of going from there and really just being very vocal with it. And then you start to just get into conversations. You won't get into everyone. You will have powers that be to kind of push you out. Doesn't matter who you are. But I think that's a way to start getting into those spaces. And even like now, I'm going to go and I have both of you on my mind now. I'm going to go and, if things come out, say, oh, you should really talk to them, get them in on things that have a lot to say about AI. And I don't think there's any substitute, especially now, for that kind of connection that happens through a podcast or any sort of content. And then that can hopefully eventually open up doors for you or for any librarian.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. That was a brilliant way to finish. So I'm going to repeat myself. Thank you for joining me, Jason and Ruth, tonight. Any tools that we've talked about will be in the show notes below. As always, if you'd like to comment on anything that you've heard today, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast so you don't miss out on future discussions. Thank you very much for listening.